All right then. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue. It's time for another Amish Inquisition, episode 367 on the 2nd of March 2025. I'm Phil.
I am Ben.
And I am Matt.
And we're very happy tonight to be joined by physicist Michael Pravica. How you doing, Mike? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good to see you all, and thanks for inviting me.
Good. You're more than welcome, yes. And I think maybe a good way to start, before we get too deep into metaphysics and hyperdimensions and all that kind of stuff, maybe for people watching and listening who aren't familiar with you, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do for a living?
Sure. I'm a physicist. I'm an experimental physicist, so I have a laboratory. I study typically matter subjected to extreme conditions, high pressure, high radiation, and high temperature, kind of the things you might see in a nuclear detonation. Basically, it's also looking at, what's going on inside planets like Jupiter, where you have very high pressures and, sort of dreams like holy grails, like metallic hydrogen. And so I study sort of what happens to matter under those extreme conditions. And I've been at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, for about 23 years.
Wow. So you teach full time there?
Yeah, I teach and I do research and I do service. And part of the service is outreach to the community, which this would count.
Ah, excellent.
Oh, can you count? Does this count as a continuous professional development?
Yeah.
CPD?
Well, I mean, as a physicist, I love physics, obviously, and I love to talk about physics, and I love to share that knowledge and insight, and so that's part of what I do. Yes, for my job.
No, that's great. Yeah, we'll spread the word, certainly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, the reason you're here and how I heard about you is because of this article in Popular Mechanics, which came out the end of last year. Was it September, October, maybe last year?
Late September.
Yeah. So could you tell us a bit about that article and why you think it had such an impact in the culture? Yeah.
So just to give a little bit of background, I often, when people contact the university for questions about physics and science and beyond, oftentimes the office might contact me. And so there was a journalist at Popular Mechanics that was interested in doing an article on panpsychism. And of course, I didn't know a lot about panpsychism, but I mean, of course, I have my perspectives and I looking into it. And so we sort of had this interview last August, and then I was in Flagstaff at a conference, and so she was asking me about it, and I said, well, this is kind of getting into the metaphysics and about why I don't really believe in panpsychism. And so I said, at some point, I have to go beyond our four-dimensional space-time universe. And she just got more and more interested, and she said, I'm so interested in what you have to say. I want to do an article just on your perspectives. I said, well, okay, that's fine. But again, we have to go outside of physics, what I call metaphysics, to kind of really get into it. And she was totally okay with that. And then surprisingly, she had contacted her editor there, and then the editor was like, yeah, this is really cool stuff, and let's publish it. So they published this article, and I never had the experience of having something go viral before. So it just exploded. I mean, I had hundreds, 300, 350 emails, Facebook messages, requests. I had somebody call me from India wanting to discuss life, the universe, and everything, and somebody from Peru, and it was been quite an odyssey. And to this day, people are still writing me. I just had an email this an hour ago from someone from Oregon write me. And, it's been interesting just because, I've met a lot of interesting people that have, many of them are not scientists. I have met scientists who are very excited about these ideas of mine. And I'll be honest with you, I was surprised by the overwhelmingly positive response to that article. And then this, being interviewed on this podcast and other venues is just kind of proof positive of that.
I get the impression, this is just my intuition, but for lay people like us who are outside of the academy, outside the professional sciences, if
Academia.
you like, people like me. Often we have a perception that physicists are very materialistic in nature, and they don't want to sort of stretch into metaphysics because maybe there's a cognitive dissonance or a worry about not being taken seriously professionally, that sort of thing. Do you think, am I on the right tracks there?
You're definitely on the right track, Phil. But I would say, first of all the scientists, physicists tend to have the highest chance of being religious. Some of the greatest physicists, such as Isaac Newton and Nikola Tesla, were in fact deeply religious. In fact, Isaac Newton was so religious they wanted to burn him as a heretic in the 17th century, because he was asking people to believe in something they couldn't see, the concept of a field. I would argue there are many aspects of physics that actually require faith in some sense. And what I mean by that faith is believing in something that you don't have full evidence for. For example, we believe that all of the laws of physics outside of the solar system that we live are the laws of physics as we know them. Conservation of charge, conservation of energy, or charge, I mean by neutrality of the universe. And yet physicists tend to not challenge that there could be different laws of physics, in Alpha Centauri or elsewhere. So, I mean, it's not, physicists tend to be people who like to think outside of the box. Obviously, the fact that there are physicists that believe in string theory, for example, which is something that has really no experimental verification as of yet. Physicists look at dark matter. That's another one that's tough to kind of really get measurements, but it doesn't mean that they don't have an imagination and they don't think about what might be beyond our conventional physics. So I mean, it's not that it's kind of a natural course for a physicist, I think, to wonder, and that's how you get into physics, is you want to ask questions. What is the mechanism? How do things work? And pretty much within this universe, I can, explain just about everything with physics, with the exception of consciousness. And so that's kind of how that Popular Mechanics article, we led into that. And that's where you have to go kind of outside of our universe, in my opinion, to get some answers.
That's a nice segue into consciousness, I think. So what is it, as far as your understanding goes, what is it about consciousness that's special or maybe doesn't fit into the mechanistic models that we have as far as physics goes?
Right. Well, first off, we have this gift where we have the ability to think outside of the box. We can do ansatz experiments, and we can basically imagine, basically do experiments in our head where we're outside of the experiment, but we can imagine what's going on. That's a gift. And the fact that physicists have come up with ideas that there might be parallel universes that are offset in time, for example. And again, the fact that we have a mathematics that is comfortable with the concept of infinity, for example. There's not only one infinity, there's a whole group, families of infinities called Aleph 1, Aleph naught, etc. So the fact that we have this mathematics that is comfortable with infinity, is comfortable with the idea of higher dimensions. It's very easy from a geometric perspective to look at 5, 6, 7 dimensions. You just start with something called a metric, a length, and you just define that length in 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, 3, and on and on. So the fact that we have all of these abilities as human beings, that our minds, which are limited in volume, can comprehend the concept of infinite volumes, to me is definitely an aspect of consciousness. And also an aspect of consciousness is the awareness, the simultaneous awareness of past, present, and future. And that, again, transcends our universe, which is currently in the present, but has been in the past and will go into the future. That's something that, again, transcends the four-dimensional physics laws based in our four-dimensional space-time universe.
As far as you mentioned past, present, and future, it seems to me that this is linked very much to memory. So if we had if we had no memory whatsoever, I don't think we'd be able to have a concept of the past. And likewise, how we understand the future, I guess, is by making, you know, you can make a prediction. So if I hold a stone out in front of me, I predict that if I drop this stone, it's going to hit the ground. But again, if I've no memory, I don't even know that I've picked that stone up, so I can't really conceptualize the future either. So is there something, do you think, that's tying consciousness to memory, which allows us to conceive of a phenomenon like time?
Well, yes, absolutely. Memory is stored patterns in your brain. I argue they're based on a holographic wave interference concept. And so we can picture, we can visualize what's happened in the past. If, like you said, if rocks fell from a mountain, then we can certainly extrapolate and do what I call to my students, you're doing physics every moment of your existence. I'm just trying to make you aware of it. So absolutely, that awareness is part of it, but also things like empathy, things like, again, thinking about possibilities of other universes, which we have no experimental evidence. The creativity that we have is all a part of a sort of a greater consciousness, if you will. Even Nikola Tesla said that we are all receivers and transmitters. And he felt there was some higher level of energy, of information, if you will, that we all can tap into. It's just how resonant are we with that energy? And then what are we going to do with it? You know, if we have an insight, do we follow through with that insight, or do we just let it pass? And Tesla would talk about that. I'd have these flashes of insight. Sometimes I would grab them and I would do something with them and make them reality. So other times they would just let go. So, I mean, all of that is part of consciousness, in my opinion.
Well, it's like, where do things come from? Like if you think of a table, that had to be conjured in someone's imagination before it could be created. Someone had to come up with a need that was needed to be fulfilled, or a utility. Same with, I don't know, like spear fishing, or, you know, when we were hunter gatherers, whatever. These things come from like a different realm, like they're sort of plucked out of the ether. Someone has this light bulb moment, and then from then on, this is it's brought into reality, into physical reality, if you like.
Well, even the ancient Greeks believed, for example, in a table, let's say that you have a conception of this table in your head. And of course, it's a perfect conception. It's perfectly flat. It's, you know, perfectly made. And then, of course, you have this higher ether, if you will, of ideas. And then you try and make it a reality. And of course, in reality, it's never quite what you had hoped for, but it's good enough. It works. And so we have, I believe, a region in our brain, maybe that taps into this higher dimensional region, where we can get ideas, where we can get insights, and then we apply those insights to the real world.
Yeah, that's like Plato's world of forms.
Yeah, the concept of a muse, I guess. Existed outside of...
Yeah, they would have called it the muse, I think, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and these things are plucked into reality. It's quite astonishing, really, because, I mean, I guess we're the only... I mean, I've heard stories of other species, like, using tools and things like that, like is it crows or ravens?
Elephants.
Elephants
and
well.
monkeys, they've shown will use tools. Like elephants will try and use sticks to help grab leaves, or I mean, they've, with their trunks they've grabbed. So I mean, yeah, there are animals that use tools, but we are as far as we know, the only animals who can actually live within our mind. We can live within our ideas, and conceive of novel. It's one thing to accidentally discover something that, oh yeah, this is great, this works as a tool, but it's another thing to conceive of something in your head and actually make it a reality.
Right, got you. Yeah.
There's no elephant tables yet.
So
Not yet. Maybe there will be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned something before about memory. Did you call it a holographic wave theory? Was that right?
Well, yes. I have sort of I have a paper I've written called Human Behavior on Waves. And so I've argued, based on the concept of the wave-particle duality, that you can look at a human being as a complete interference pattern of waves including energy including what we call matter waves from all of the particles in our bodies. And so if you follow that line of thinking, of philosophical thinking, then you can find very interesting aspects of human behavior that actually have something to do with waves. So now I don't know, that this is with every single person, but, many times when I'm recalling something, a beautiful memory, for example, being outside in a park, of course, I'm picturing, oh, how green were the leaves, how red were, the roses. And so I remember those pictures and as if I'm trying to recreate something that was in the past. And so I do believe that there's a significant component of our memory based on just like how you might store a hologram on a medium, or how you store information on a CD. Basically, it's a wave interference pattern, and our brain is storing those interference patterns in a very fascinating way through the neural network, and basically recalling it when we want to.
Do you think that diminishes over time the more, or the more you remember a memory over time? There are changes, I would think. Is there in some way an influence there in the re-remembrance of an original memory and how that may change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, obviously, the brain, is the most complicated machine that we know of in this universe. And
Not mine.
yes, there are times where you're with it, times where you're not so with it. Times where you've overdone it on something, and then you've kind of worn out the circuitry. So, yes, I do believe that you have relative ability that can change with time. However, a lot of older people, like I remember my grandfather, he would be talking and we'd get the latest update from like 1929. And so I think that there is something in your soul, in your body, so to speak, your id, your brain wave function, I like to call it, that when you get older, perhaps, you're kind of done with some of the memories that you're creating every day currently, but you live in the past because that's your glory days. That's where you had the most positive memories. And maybe you don't want to accept the reality that, you're getting older and older. So, I mean, I think that it just depends on the person. But I mean, I think that of course, your brain, your ability to store information will affect you. But with more people that, with these problems, unless, of course, if you've been hit in the head or something, you suffered a concussion. I think that when you get older, you tend to reflect more on your past more than the more recent, your present. And so that does have some impact in how you function in the world. Absolutely. For better or for worse.
Yeah, I wonder how much of our sort of potential is still locked up, because I'm interested in savant skills, for example. And you have people who have never been taught an instrument, and yet they can play symphonies. And this sometimes follows traumatic injuries as well. Brain injuries. People who can, there's a famous guy in the UK, he was flown, I think, in a helicopter over London, taken back down onto the ground, and then he drew the skyline, basically, and the detail was incredible. He would get the number of windows in buildings correct, in skyscrapers, that sort of stuff. And it just throws this whole question mark over what we're capable of, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, let me just say that when you're looking at issues like that, a lot of it has to do with, there's many different levels of intelligence. And so I argue there's a brain wave function, your id, your soul, however you want to look at it. And depending on the circuitry in your brain, it's just like a car or a computer that functions really fast or does certain tasks really well, but maybe some of the circuitry elsewhere is not so well constructed. But also, I think it's when you're talking about like idiot savants, I think there's I call it the collapse of the wave function, where the wave function is focused in some region of the brain. And, it's really precocious at whatever that happens to be, counting cards, for example, or like you said, having a photographic memory that you can reproduce things with astonishing detail. but all of that has to do with the ability to focus and then defocus, and what regions are you choosing to focus. And that all has to do with basically the issues of, how the brain has been wired. But there's also another aspect to it. There's a famous book that was called, I believe, Proof of Heaven. And I forget, Ebers or Ebman, Alexander, something like that. I read the book. And he makes a comment in the beginning of the book about when you have these moments of like fight or flight, like, you're falling from a parachute. And then you do these hyper calculations. And he's a doctor. He's a medical doctor. And I myself, I found I have certain, like when I'll drop a piece of soap in the shower, I'll be able to pick it, like catch it in midair. And so there's obviously certain abilities that we have as human beings to think very quickly. And in this book, he was arguing it's like beyond the speed of, brain waves, of electrical impulses. And I actually I see some logic to that. And I mean, we'd have to go, more deeply into the issue of how do you calculate, what is wave mathematics and stuff. But I think we do all have a certain hyper ability, which again may be ascribed to our ability to go outside of the box hyperdimensionally, and then collapse to where we're needing to solve the problem. Find the solution outside, and then collapse it to implement that solution. I don't care what the solution is. Running away from somebody, a thief who's trying to chase you, or escaping a fire in a building. We just have a certain ability, which I think in some sense might even go faster than certain electrical impulses. And this may tie into these ideas.
Helen from the chat has asked, I don't know if have you come across or heard of a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes at all?
No, I don't. I'm kind of relatively new to the world of metaphysics, but it sounds interesting. I can also explain telepathy from a wave-based perspective.
Oh, go on then.
Okay. So there's something called evanescent waves that are in a medium. And this is all physics. I mean, it's nothing new. And they have a small penetration depth outside of that medium. And so basically, of course, it's well established that there are brain waves in your brain. And this is largely believed how you're thinking. So the point is they can measure these brain waves outside of your brain. And that's, again, well established. You can get sensors. And so I believe that things like ESP, telepathy, if you go into this concept of waves that are just exiting your brain, that have a half, how should I say, like a distance, a scope outside of your brain, it all makes sense. It's not really that hard to explain.
You should check out the telepathy tapes. The host of the podcast was on the Joe Rogan show, I think on Friday.
I listened to a little bit of it.
She's getting some major exposure. One of the most fascinating things about the podcast was all the people who were subject were non-verbal autistic children, people who can't speak, communicate. They're not in control of their bodies.
Well, they could communicate, couldn't they? But they couldn't speak, basically.
Well, they use this thing called spelling, don't they, with their tablet often. Mm-hmm. But as well as sort of communicating with their parents or teachers telepathically, there was this phenomena called the what's it called? The Hill.
The Hill.
Yeah, where these non-vocal kids would sort of cover their heads with pillows, and then they would meet in like a conscious space somewhere and communicate as a group.
Yeah, so they're getting these stories from, completely unconnected participants from around the world, and they all told the same or similar story of meeting each other on the hill, which just seems quite strange.
But it's bonkers.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Interesting though. Michael, it'd be...
Yeah, I mean, as we get deeper into the hyperdimensionality, I believe that we are all connected creatures. So, one of the key aspects is this concept of spooky action at a distance between quantum particles that Einstein didn't believe in and other physicists have a hard time with. But if you actually expand that into a hyperdimensional connection, it all kind of makes sense. And so we are sort of an extension of those quantum particles. We are quantum souls in some sense. And I believe that we are all connected on a higher dimensional level. And I have ideas. I want to do experiments on this actually. So I'm kind of hoping if this paper gets accepted, I'm going to start a new field of research. And I would actually, again, and I would like to make measurements in where we can try and verify some of these ideas of ESP. And I think I have some good ideas that, on how to do those measurements. Obviously, hyperdimensionality. I've had a lot of people ask me about this. Doc, can you do experiments? Well, no, not right now. I can't do an experiment from the standpoint of, my experiments are within the 4-dimensional space-time continuum. But of course, I believe we have something way out, infinitely in scope that is hyperdimensional. If you think of a balloon expanding, it's on the surface of the balloon, it's 2 dimensions, but you're expanding in 3 dimensions. And so our universe, I believe, similarly is expanding as this bubble. And, we're on the surface of the bubble in a sense, so to speak. And so, it's natural that there would be higher dimensions, but I can't prove that in the laboratory, at least not at the present time. But there may be other things that we may be able to do tricks, with quantum mechanics and again, issues like ESP, deja vu, where there is a connectedness, I believe, between all of us. And I'm excited to look into that.
Yeah, you raised a point in the video you sent me on the email that the universe is expanding into something as far as we understand. And the question is, if it's expanding into something, that suggests something outside of our 3 dimensions plus time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the point is that if I can imagine that, it's, there's probably some kernel of truth, because again, I believe a lot of our ideas are coming from some sort of a higher dimension that we tap into. And again, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. If physicists conceive of parallel universes that might be offset in time and black holes as being tunnels into those different universes, it's very natural that there should be a higher dimension. Just one other concept, just if you're trying to understand this, is we have this concept of Euclidean space. Okay, so Euclidean space is what we would call like flat space. So one analogy is 2-dimensional Euclidean space is like the dimensions of a table that this laptop is on. Now, if you think of that Euclidean space, maybe that table as maybe being a layer of aluminum or saran wrap. Now you crumple that aluminum. You've got something that was originally 2 dimensions, but now you've crumpled it into 3 dimensions. Well, our universe is not really Euclidean. It's Euclidean outside of black holes, outside of stars and planets, but it's really non-Euclidean when you really deal with, and this is what Einstein's general relativity dealt with. And so the point is, it's just a very natural aspect to say, well, actually, if it's non-Euclidean, then you have to accommodate higher dimensions for the universe.
Got another interesting question from Melissa in the chat. It's a 2-part question. In your view, Mike, are all living things conscious? And if that's the case, could a machine be conscious?
Okay, I'll answer that question. So first off, we have a gift, and I believe that gift is our soul, which is a portal into these higher possibly infinite dimensions. Anything that we build in this 3+1 dimensional space-time will not have that gift, will not have that portal, and therefore will never see. The essence is that we as human beings, we're actually nonlinear thinkers, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole down that way, but we have to learn how to think logically. Babies are not logical thinkers to begin with. They're irrational, and the reason for that is that's what allows our creativity and allowed us to basically become the dominant species of this planet. Now, that said, animals, other creatures, I believe, of course, they have intelligence. But as far as having that soul, I can't really say for sure. In my opinion, I don't think so. I think if, let's say, you have a favorite pet, when you die, I think you can recreate that pet. But I don't know. I can't say for sure whether or not it has a soul. I think that we have a special gift from our Creator. If you believe the Bible, there was the kiss that God gave to Adam. That was a hyperdimensional kiss that allowed Adam to have this connection with this much higher dimensional world, which I believe was actually infinitely dimensional. And so that's something that's unique to humanity. The fact that we think about a creator that, I don't know of any species, any race of humans that has not had some idea of a religion, some moral code, some idea that we're here because of a creator. And so I'm not saying, again, I don't have the answers for that, but I have an opinion. And so I believe that's a special uniqueness to humanity.
Yeah, it's interesting animals. I have a dog, and he dreams, and you can watch him dream, and he's like he's running after a ball while he's asleep, and you wonder just how conscious these animals, around us are. In P.D. Uspensky talks about animals, like sort of lower animals, if that's a nice way of putting it, probably not, as having a sort of like a 2D consciousness. That they live in more of a 2D reality, whereas we live in a 3D or 3D plus time reality.
Let me just say at the outset that life itself, it doesn't matter what life form, cockroaches, bacteria, that is the most amazing miracle, as far as I'm concerned, of this universe. And so the fact that every femtosecond or even less, you have these amazing chemical reactions that are driving your body to be this living being, I think is astonishing. And so I know that animals I do agree, they have a special connection. There's a famous Twilight Zone episode where there was this guy who didn't realize he had died, and he had this dog his dog that they were hunting together, and his dog leads him to heaven, and whereas Satan's trying to convince him to go to hell. I do believe in that. I mean, when my mother passed away, I remember that we came back from the hospital, and the German Shepherd, Honey, that she was taking care of, I'd never seen a dog more sad in my life. And I just knew that she knew that my mother had passed. So, I mean, yes, there is, I'm not saying that animals are not special. They're just not humans. That's all. And beyond that, I can't, it's metaphysics. I can't really comment.
It comes down, I think, to me, the question is that due to a gift, as you put it, that we have as humans, or is it a function of intelligence? Is it because that we have a higher level of intelligence that we can sort of create consciousness and tap into the hyperdimensional reality to grab ideas? Or is it, I guess I know what you're going to say. It's because we've been given it. It's a gift.
Well, I would say, first of all, we have certain things like music. Music is hard to explain from an evolutionary biological perspective because it doesn't do much except tintillate our infinite imagination in some sense. And there are people who would argue when you die, when you communicate through waves, through sort of a musical waves, in heaven. So, I mean, again, I think, if you take it from a more creator perspective, we're here to be the top dog, to be the curators, the people that are going to take care of this world, this 3+1 dimensional world that we live in. Animals, for us, they serve us. They give us companionship, but they also give us food. And if you look at, human beings, we're kind of pathetic when it comes to, we don't make our own food. There are certain proteins we don't make ourselves. So we don't do well without each other, without this ability to be creative and make tools, as you pointed out. But I mean, I think also there's a reason for that, is that we're here to enjoy the world. We're here to observe it. We're here to sort of glorify our creator by living this wonderful planet, this wonderful miracle of life that we live in. And the fact that we have that awareness of all of the what it took to make this universe. I mean, I'm talking starting from the Big Bang, starting, if you read Steven Weinberg's First 3 Minutes, it's a beautiful story of the first 3 minutes of this universe and how particles converted and then turned into hydrogen. Once you had hydrogen, you could start doing nucleosynthesis. And, we are literally stardust. And so if you look at that kind of a perspective, and now the stardust, there may have been, organic molecules synthesized in outer space, and then they came here in asteroids or comets, and then life kind of started as an eigenstate of the universe. When you see that whole picture of 13.5 billion years of the story of this reality that we live in, first of all, to me, it becomes very obvious that this universe was designed to support us. But it's just so beautiful that it's like we were here to enjoy it. We were put here to sort of be a testament, a witness. And to be a witness means you have to be connected with that higher dimensional creativity, that higher dimensional energy, and be connected with it, to be kind of in constant contact and being appreciative. I think that's just something that's very beautiful personally. It gives me a sense of purpose, gives me why am I here? What am I here for? And I mean, it just makes me happy to be alive.
Is the Big Bang theory rock solid in your opinion?
Well, nothing. There's very few things in this universe that are rock solid as far as human perspectives. There was Newtonian mechanics, which is a beautiful thing, which works, but then you go into the limit of very high speeds, close to the speed of light, and then it kind of breaks down, and you have to reformulate the Newtonian mechanics. So anytime you're having a theory of everything, I think you're going to find that it will be corrected, it will be improved. It's not that it's useless, it's just that there may be other realities that we just yet don't know. Like when Isaac Newton said there's this concept of a gravitational field, and we're under the influence of the gravitational field, and people wanted to burn him at the stake because they said, you're asking us to believe in something we don't see. There are so many things in our reality, you may not know. There's thousands of neutrinos that pass through you every second, coming from the sun, coming from outer space, but they don't interact with you, so it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that there's not a reality that you just don't know about, that's behind the surface. So is there hyperdimensionality that influences our connectivity as human beings, love, our feelings of this universe? Just because we can't prove it doesn't mean it's not there. And so, I mean, I think as far as the Big Bang, it's still a work in progress. Evolution is still a theory in progress. I mean, there are elements to it that, sure, we believe, but there are things like jumping genes, quaternary folding structure of proteins and how that influences repressor proteins on your genes that we're still working on. We're still scratching the surface. We're just babes in the woods, if you want to really look into the deep reality that is what made us who we are. And so, I mean, to me, it's not that I have the answers. I mean, I happen to be religious, but I mean, I've never talked to my creator. So of course, everything I'm talking about is speculation, but I think I have a right as a human being to have that speculation, to imagine what might be, because first of all, it gives me an inspiration about why I want to continue studying the universe as a physicist. And it also gives me a sense of purpose. And, just like this, if you look at a very high performance sports car, a Maserati or a Lamborghini, you may not know the designer of that Lamborghini, but there was a designer. And if you study that Lamborghini, all the intricate curves, all the beautiful thermodynamics, the combustion engine, the torques, you're like, wow, whoever that designed this machine was an amazing person. Well, I look at the universe that way. This universe is this machine in some sense. We're in this machine. Yes, we depend on this machine, but there's something outside of the universe that allows us to look at that machine from afar and say, wow, what an amazingly complex thing that just everything worked out just right. The charge of the electron was the right value, the mass of the proton, that we had a universe that's not a dud. Richard Feynman said this, one of my professors at Caltech, that if you just change any of the constants of this functioning universe by a fraction of a percent, it would be a dud. It wouldn't sustain life. And so to me, I mean, yeah, the Big Bang is a theory. There are, challenges to that theory, but also challenges maybe because theorists are trying to work on theories of the everything, and it just doesn't quite work in properly. For example, to predict the gravitational constant. But it just means more work needs to be done, more measurements need to be taken. But it doesn't mean that there are not beautiful insights that can be gleaned from thinking about those ideas, like the Big Bang.
Okay, I've got a question. So we live in 3 dimensions in space, right? And then we often think of the 4th dimension as time. So we're in space, and the 4th dimension is time, going backwards, forwards, and the present. If you had a 5th dimensional being, presumably that would exist in a reality that's beyond time. So it would be able to experience all time happening all at once, beginning, middle, end, Big Bang, heat, death of the universe, whatever you fancy. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. So I've argued that, you could define time as basically being the conversion of energy. Physicists like to say there's an arrow of time, and you could define it in terms of increasing entropy with time, as time goes on. I like to think of it in terms of conversion of energy. So if you look at the Big Bang, in the beginning of time t equals 0, for our universe, all of this energy was kind of in one spot, one mass. And ever since the dawn of time for us, energy has been converting from one form into another. And so that energy, ultimately, some of that resulted in us being here to be able to appreciate the universe. I think from a creator's perspective, if you think of like a painter, so the painter has a painting, and we live inside that painting in some sense. And the painter has created this painting for us to live in. And basically, the time inside that painting is not the same, is going to be different than any concept of the creator. Time is not relevant if you live forever. Time is just, it doesn't mean like what it means for us. For us, time is defined by the beating of your heart, roughly once per second, which is how clocks got started. Or the how many times does the Earth go around the sun, or the Earth go about, rotate about its own axis. That's how we would define a day. So we have this time in this universe based on these natural type of events. But outside of this universe, I don't believe there is time. Einstein would have said, or Minkowski, that basically time is, you could treat it as if it's another dimension. It's obviously a special dimension. It's not like X, Y, and Z, but you could treat it as if it were another dimension. And so if you kind of take that, extend that concept, and you say, well, if I go to higher dimensions, time may just be part of that bubble that we call our universe, but it doesn't mean that it has any bearing outside of that bubble.
Right. You mentioned Flatlands, a book which I think it's called Flatlands, isn't it? Which I haven't read from.
Yeah.
And I've not read the book, but from what I gathered from what you mentioned, it's talking about a 2-dimensional being encountering a 3-dimensional being, and
Correct.
the confusion that would ensue from a 2-dimensional being, how it would, you mentioned it appearing, growing, and then decaying.
Correct.
Now, this is my idea, is that because we're 3-dimensional beings, when we see time, when we experience time, we just have the present. Past and future don't really exist in our consciousness. We only have the now. And is that maybe, like the square seeing the cube, we're seeing time because we just can't perceive it because it's that extra dimension. It's those 3 axes plus.
Yes, I would fully agree with you. If you saw the film Interstellar, which the main science advisor was my professor Kip Thorne, who won the Nobel Prize for looking into this LIGO, this light interferometric gravitational observatory. You look at this, time becomes a very nonlinear thing. So you have like this concept of a tesseract, which is a cube inside of a cube, and so if you can go to a different point in time, it's like going to another cube in some sense. And so this is where some of the ideas where you might have parallel universes, which you kind of see in this film Interstellar, where you can pop into one cube and now you're at some point of time, some progression of reality, but then you go into another cube, but you've gone back 50 years or something. So, I mean, certainly this is possible by physics. And so I think that, but the interesting thing is the fact that we can even think about that, the fact that we could think of, well, what would it be like to go backwards in time? Like, in Back to the Future, meet your parents and, accidentally prevent them from or meeting. And, then would you be there in the future? These issues of causality and, what would it be like if we could go into the future? I mean, these are all possible. And physicists have thought about this. It's got fundamental physics in it, but of course it's really metaphysics because as far as we know, we don't know anybody that's actually physically gone back in time. But, there's a lot of imagination. There's a lot of films like Frequency or, just others where you're looking at people that what would be the consequence if you could alter the course of human history, if you could kill Hitler or something like that. And I mean, the Twilight Zone has been very, they used to do that, a lot of those kinds of concepts. And I mean, it's something that I think humans like to think about. Obviously, I think more than anything, we want to think about it from the standpoint of, well, I made mistakes and correct those mistakes. I would say no, I mean, basically you get one life, but it doesn't mean that, but the idea is to learn from those mistakes so you don't repeat them in the future. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we can do as human beings. And I mean, those mistakes can be not just within one person, they can be within a family, they can be within a city, a village, or nations, or, humanity itself. And so I think that that's one interesting concept of consciousness is being aware of the mistakes made in the past, and then can we sort of do something to prevent them from happening again in the future?
Just going back to consciousness, I suppose that the mainstream would say that consciousness is a byproduct of brain chemistry. It's completely located in the brain. There's nothing sort of external. And then there's like woo-woo guys like me who think it's more like an antenna situation where your brain's more of an antenna and it could be beamed in from dimension 6 or 7, whatever you want. What's your views on it? Do you think that consciousness is located in the brain or external or a bit of both or what?
Yeah, well, I think that what the brain chemistry does is sets up the brain to be resonant with receiving and transmitting information. And I think, again, brain chemistry cannot explain something like empathy or a hyper awareness that some people have. And this has been my wife, for example, she, I mean, it's hard to pull a fast one on her because she just knows right away, when what's going on. And I think that, two people that love each other, that are connected to each other, I think they have that sort of a hyperdimensional connection. And there is brain chemistry as part of it, certainly. But I mean, the ability to kind of break out and have that hyperdimensional awareness, I can't explain that from a standpoint of brain chemistry. I can partially explain it from the standpoint of waves in this universe, but I think there's even something higher, that there is, like I said, there's a quantum connectedness that we all have. And, you could call it karma, you could call it whatever you want, that I don't see where the brain chemistry comes in there about this ability to go, and jump dimensions, come up with the creativity that comes up with this higher dimensional math, Hilbert spaces, for example. I just don't see where the brain chemistry comes in. Brain chemistry sets up the mind to be resonant like a transmitter and receiver, but that's kind of the limit, I think, where the brain chemistry goes.
That's really interesting, the concept of the brain chemistry setting your receiver up. That made me think of the potential for medical uses in future to perhaps alter brain chemistry to receive different frequencies or access different levels. And potentially, we were talking about savants earlier, applying that ability to people who don't have it? Because ultimately we all have the same sort of biology. Our brains are the same. So why can't we all do everything if it was purely down to biology and chemistry? But it would be fascinating if we could kind of alter that receiver aspect. Yeah.
Absolutely, Ben. I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
No, sorry.
Yeah. I'm excited to answer this question. Part of the reason I wrote that paper, Human Nature and Waves, are that I made an argument, right now in conventional treatment, psychiatric issues, for example, or what do they call it, neurodivergent conditions. Basically, there are two main approaches. There's psychotherapy, where you talk problems out, you confront your demons, whatever's bothering you, and then maybe you come to some sort of an internal peace. Then there's also, of course, the pharmacological aspect, the brain chemistry. Can we alter the brain chemistry to, and there was even a film some years ago, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name of it, but it was with Robin Williams. And he was, I think he was a doctor or something, and there was some patient who was closed, like a closed patient.
Yeah, it was Awakenings.
Isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Awakenings, the film. Yeah, it's based on an Oliver Sacks.
Yeah, Awakenings, that's it. And then he tried this drug that for one day or, for, I don't know, some brief period of time, they just suddenly became coherent, aware of everything. And so, yes, I mean, I'm certainly not going to knock down the aspect of brain chemistry. The problem is that oftentimes what the pharmacological solutions do is it's sort of a short-term solution. You're not dealing with the issue from a long-term perspective. You're just trying to maybe open up some certain neural channels, pathways that were previously closed. What I believe is there may be a third way of treating patients where it's a wave therapy, what I would call. So, for example, if you've got a patient, one of the issues with autism is that there's a focus and the brain wave function, if you will, is kind of having a hard time connecting with the exterior environment and receiving signals. So the question is, are there ways to open those pathways? And to me, one of the ways would be music. Art may be another aspect, painting, because you're getting colors to sort of engage the brain wave function with the outside world. For somebody like me, who's probably ADHD, was never identified, but in the 70s, nobody knew what that was. But I like to defocus. I like to kind of see the forest for the trees, and I have a harder time focusing unless it's something I really like to do, like this, for example. And so, are there ways to help I have my own strategies, and I've been okay. I mean, I'm a professor of physics. I mean, I love what I'm doing, and I'm okay. You know what I mean? But I mean, are there ways, strategies that I use or could use to focus better? Absolutely. And so I do believe that there is a third, like a triangle. The pharmacological solution, the therapy solution, and then the wave-based solution. And that waves could be anything. Microwaves, infrared. Sound waves to basically excite the brain and sort of open up these different or close these different pathways. I'm excited about it, absolutely, and it all connects with everything we've been talking about.
Thank you. I just have a follow up on the pharmacological side. So
yeah,
I was originally thinking about fine tuning brain chemistry ultimately in a medical sense. So you would have all the research and you'd understand the exact requirements to access whatever to adjust the brain chemistry in just the right way to get to where you want to be. Thinking about the present day, and this is more like hitting a nut with a sledgehammer, but what about psychedelics and DMT and LSD and things like that as a way to almost, like I say, just flood the brain chemistry and access to, because we've heard on this podcast experiences of people who've done these things and told tales of what they've seen and
not necessarily drugs, yoga,
NDs
and meditation.
Meditation, transcendental. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so just to comment on that, first of all, I'm not a drug user. I don't know what psychedelic drugs. I have talked to people who have, because, with this theory, and they got interested. And my understanding is, for some of them, they have this sense of this connectedness, that when they use them, they feel all these souls, or just this, like they're this part of this small part of this larger, much larger entity. That all jives with what I'm saying.
Mhm.
That said, however, as a physicist, I need every single brain cell I can muster up for what I do. And so I'm a little bit hesitant. I mean, there is a side of me that is curious, I'll be honest with you. And based on what I've talked to people, but it's like, I myself, as far as creativity, I don't need it. But yes, there's been no question about it that some people have said drugs have enhanced their creativity. Maybe we could ask, Led Zeppelin, or, some of these cool groups. I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just going to say this. The brain is the most amazing machine that we know of, computer that we know of in the universe. And it is so, we are just scratching the surface in terms of what are the effects of brain chemistry on your thinking, on your, thought, the brainwave patterns. And so I would first just ask people to exercise caution, and I would say, perhaps the one good thing about some of the efforts to legalize things like marijuana is just that it's going to now allow scientists to study this, because before they couldn't really study it because it was an illegal drug. And I do know that there are people who swear by being treated, by smoking marijuana, or having the THC, that it helped their pain, or and I'm certainly not against that, medical marijuana. I just caution people, especially children, youth, when their brains are developing. And I don't want them to be in a situation, God gave us this gift of this amazing brain, and I want every human being to realize their natural potential as much as possible. I understand that people have suffered, concussions, or, or other things, cancer, whatever. And so, of course, this should be considered, but in this context of doing experiments, and then really trying to get a handle on how do these different drugs influence the brain. I mean, I remember I had surgery on my knee, and I was, the doctor said, prescribed hydrocodone, which is one of these opioids. But he said, be careful, it's very addictive. And, it freaked me out, but you may be in so much pain. And so, I mean, and it was, it's obviously a very controlled substance. So I remember taking half a pill, and it did absolutely nothing to me. And I found out that there's some percentage, like 10% of the population, they're just not influenced by some of these drugs.
Wow.
So I don't even know, like, would it even have an effect on me if I ever did? Not that I'm saying I would try these psychedelic substances, but certainly could it have an impact in terms of helping that brainwave function to expand, for example, if it's not connecting with the environment, or get a little more control if it's too excited about the environment, and too open. Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I can't say no. I'm just simply saying we need more tests, we need more studies, and before any significant conclusion can be drawn.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're coming up to an hour already. Can't believe how quick it's gone, Mike. But maybe before we wrap up, you could tell us a bit about what you're working on now, and sort of what your hopes are for the future. You mentioned earlier about this wave consciousness theory, and trying to extrapolate on that, maybe, and tell us what hopefully we can look forward to.
Yeah, so I've submitted a paper, and often when we start sort of a field of science, we like to write papers so that people can say, oh, this person wrote a paper, and this is a worthwhile endeavor. So my hope, as far as the metaphysics, I mean, obviously this is something I could talk about all day. So it's not physics, but it is something that gives me so much inspiration. And, I mean, obviously I've had so much interest that it's something that just won't go away. So, I mean, I'm certainly going to accommodate that as far as interviews, as far as people asking me, as best as I can answer. But I mean, as far as trying to do something more science-based, I am definitely interested in looking at neural physics. I mean, it's interesting that there was a physicist at Caltech that was doing different physics, and then he decided to look into the brain. and he found the left half, right half concepts of the brain and got a Nobel Prize for that. So I'm kind of at a crossroads right now where I may actually go into neural physics and using these ideas of this, and looking at how people, can they communicate? Can they have dreams, connected dreams, which if they do, it's obviously, then there is another dimension of connectivity that we all have, which I do believe we have. But it would sort of require these kinds of experiments, looking at MRI, looking at brain activity, trying to do these wave-based therapies. So, for example, could I, have certain waves that, based on standing waves of brain waves within your brain, which is maybe why people like certain music makes them happy, certain music makes them sad. Could I look at those different frequencies and then see how do they respond? How does the brain respond with regards to that, via things like MRI or, PET or something? Those are the kinds of things I would like to start moving in. Otherwise, I'm still doing my research at extreme conditions, and I do love that, doing experiments at synchrotrons. And so those will continue. But I'm starting to kind of look into these other directions, and I'm kind of getting excited.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Where can people keep up? Do you have like a mailing list or a website or social media?
I have my, I do have a website, my UNLV website. I also have a channel on Medium, medium.com, where I've had a number of writings that I've posted. Many of them are the metaphysical. Why do we need to pray? Why do we, what is the concept of good versus evil? And so, they're more than welcome to reach out. I'm always happy to, and I do have various, maybe I will start a mailing list based on when I have these kinds of writings published. I'll start including these people in the list who are interested.
Excellent. Well, this has been fabulous, I think.
It has. Yeah. Michael, can I just ask, you mentioned about working with extreme conditions. I think you mentioned thermonuclear explosions previously. I was recently in Las Vegas and I went to the Atomic Museum there. Are you affiliated with that? Because that was a fantastic trip.
Yes. So the Atomic Museum is right next to UNLV, my university. And of course, for many decades, they still do. They have the Nevada test site where they would do live tests. They don't do those anymore, but they did do up to the 80s, 1980s. They did some of those live tests. And I recently visited the Nevada test site for the first time. And I have to say it was awesome, to see a massive crater that is basically a gorge that was made by one small level nuclear weapon was quite a lesson for me. I don't do the nuclear physics as much as I used to, but I do I squeeze things to look at how, how do certain materials behave. One of the holy grails, for example, is explosions, chemical explosions. Nobody actually understands how you connect the mechanical energy of a shock wave into the quantum mechanical bond breaking energy that causes the explosion and energy that's released faster than the speed of sound. So I kind of, I continue doing those things. I collaborate with, I have collaborated in the past with Los Alamos and so it just kind of keeps everything real. It's my bread and butter as far as my research. You get some interesting concepts about energy and what energy can do to destroy the world. So, that's something we never want to have nuclear war. It would just be a horrible thing because we won't survive it. Even Einstein said World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yes, yeah. Well, on that terrifying note. Right, this has been it's been great, Mike. Thanks for your time, and we'll sign off for this part, I think.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
It's been great.
Thank you, everybody, for having me and for the interest in my ideas. And we'll just keep going.
Yeah. Look forward to what you come up with. Right. Okay, you lot watching live. We'll be back in 5-10 minutes for part 2. Thanks for joining us, and see you soon.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Bye.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.